Welcome to Adventures in Accessibility, a podcast that explores the far reaches of disability, access, and inclusion, with your host, Emily Schumann.
Welcome back, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Today's guests are Hoskie Benally and Joseph Ray. Hoskie Benally is a member of the Navajo Nation and is legally blind. He is currently employed with the Native American Disability Law Center as the Community and Government Liaison and engaged in Disability Systems Advocacy with the Navajo Nation and other Native American tribes. Benally is also involved with the National Congress of American Indians Disability Subcommittee. Prior to joining the Law Center, Benally was the CEO of a residential treatment center for Native American youth that successfully integrated Navajo culture into Western-based mental health treatment. Benally is the current president of the Navajo Nation Advisory Council on Disabilities, a former Vocational Rehabilitation Counselor, and a former member of the New Mexico Developmental Disability Planning Council. Grounded in Navajo tradition and fluent in Navajo, Benally is an experienced cultural instructor. He has a Bachelor of Science degree in Sociology from Brigham Young University. For more than 3 decades, Joseph Ray has advocated for disability services in tribal communities with a focus on independent living, elder care, and vocational rehabilitation services. Based in Pueblo of Laguna, New Mexico, he is the board chair of the National Congress of American Indians Disability Subcommittee, one of the oldest advocacy organizations for Native populations in the country. Joseph is also on the board of directors of Uniting Nursing Homes in Tribal Excellence and a member of the Pueblo People with Disabilities group. He has a special interest in strengthening support services for individuals with spinal cord injuries, particularly tribal youth, and is active in adaptive sports and long-term care programs. All right. Well, hi, Hoskie. Thanks so much for being on our podcast. We're so excited to have you.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, my pleasure. So I'd love if you could just start by telling our listeners a little bit about yourself.
I'm visually impaired. I'm legally blind, resulting from retinitis pigmentosa. Born with degenerative eye disease up to age 22, I was able to function a lot, or as being able to drive, play sports outside, read, those kind of things. I was very athletically inclined. Then in the age of 22, I lost a lot of my vision in a matter of about 2 weeks, where I had some peripheral vision, but it was my center vision that deteriorated quite a bit. So it's been a number of years now. That was back in 1972. And I'm currently employed with the Native American Disability Law Center in Farmington, New Mexico, as a community government liaison. And then I'm also the president of the Navajo Nation Advisory Council on Disabilities. And also President Biden appointed me on the National Council on Disabilities also just recently here in September. So I reside here on the Navajo Nation in Chibrock, New Mexico.
Wow, that's all really impressive work. So out of all of that, what would you say that you're the most proud of, and what are you most passionate about?
I don't know how it happened, but a real surprise to me. I just got an email. Then they said, "You're being considered. Are you interested?" So I responded back. 2 weeks later, they said I was one of the finalists. And 2 weeks later, I got an email saying that I was selected. So basically, my advocacy in disabilities is basically for Native Americans across Indian country here. We really need here in Indian country in regards to disability. So it gave me a chance to have some input. This council is basically five were from Biden's appointment. One's from the Senate, another one is from the House of Representatives, and the 8th one is somebody that stays on from the previous council. So, yeah, that's pretty excited about that and being able to bring to the forefront at a national level disability issues with Native Americans.
Yeah, and so you just alluded to this a little bit, but I do have a question for you. Kind of, how does your cultural background and your lived experience with disability influence your approach to disability work?
Like I said, I'm Navajo, and we're the largest tribe in the United States. And culturally, I speak Navajo pretty fluently. I know the traditions, and I was once counselor with the Navajo Nation Vocational Rehabilitation Program, and also was deputy director at one time. And one of the things that back then, we're still back in 1976, 79 and 80, we were going to Washington, D.C. and trying to seek funding because we were just being funded by the 4 states here that were surrounded, Arizona, Utah, and New Mexico. So they were just kind of like chipping in the program. So advocated for was using federal funds for native healing for those with disabilities and making sure that that was part of the conditions that we were seeking for funding, and of course tying it back to their disability. So that's one of the cultural things we did. And then of course just hiring people that were, like you say, Indians serving Indians is the best way to go. And so we did a lot of that. And where I'm working at now, where we do a lot of cultural relevancy services that serving the population that we serve here in the Four Corners area.
Wow, that's all really impressive. So it looks like Joseph Ray has actually joined us, our other podcast guest today. How are you, Joseph?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Good morning.
Yeah, thanks so much for being here. Now that you're here, Joseph, why don't we hear from you a little bit? Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and, some of the work that you're doing that you're proud of and passionate about?
My name is Joseph Ray from the Pueblo of Laguna in New Mexico. And my experience with living with a disability for the last almost 36 years, spinal cord injury, it's been a challenge and it remains a challenge. But I've always been thankful. Due to a car crash, I acquired a spinal cord injury in 1988. That, of course, presented life challenge to me. I was age 24 at the time when I broke my back. I had to relearn how to live, strengthen my arms. But thank goodness I did have that strength to be able to help myself become independent in my care. Again, thankfully, I had the strength of my arms to help me move and propel my wheelchair, which I still use to this day. And just lately, I've just had some challenges because of an accident I had last fall. But again, it's just the perspective living all these years with a disability is that, thank goodness for the ADA, that I'm living in a facility right now, a rehabilitation place, to have my injury taken care of. And because of lack of housing, I'm having a little bit of a difficult time getting back into the community. But everything's coming together where the wound is my injury going to be healing completely, and I'll be needing to move out of this facility and back into the community. So, ADA is affecting me right now in the fact that I'm thankful that the facilities that I'm at are ADA compliant, and that I don't have a hard time, living other than taking care of my injury right now. So the ADA, again, has affected me for all these years in many ways. Here in my community, it's an Indian reservation with about 9,000 members, but we suffer from some of the problems regarding housing. We don't have enough housing or ADA housing or the programs to make our homes accessible. And, streets aren't paved and we don't have sidewalks, so it's been a challenge having to use my wheelchair out there and just in the gravel or in dirt, and that. But again, I'm thankful that I do have the strength in my arms to propel my wheelchair. Others don't have that same strength, or because of their injury or because of their condition, they don't have that strength to do it. I'm just fortunate to be able to do it. Like I said, 35 years, just experiencing how ADA off the reservation also has been a blessing. In fact, that I can at least acquire ADA or disability services away from home when I'm doing my advocacy work on behalf of people with disabilities in tribal communities. I am fortunate enough to be able to travel to meetings and around New Mexico and around the nation. I've been doing that for 35 years.
I'm so glad to hear that you're on the mend with your injury and that things are hopefully getting a little bit better for you. And I think you really highlighted a lot of the accessibility challenges and barriers that people with disabilities continue to face. So, Hoskie, I'd love to hear, kind of the same from you. What are some accessibilities you face or people close to you face?
Basically, being visually impaired, I'm just lucky that I have a wife to help me my guide. and most people with disabilities or who have blindness like myself don't have that blessing, I guess you would say. But basically, I advocate on the Navajo Nation for people with disabilities. We're in a unique situation here on Navajo Nation, but I think other Indian tribes are a little different from tribe to tribe. But on the Navajo Nation here, because of the sovereignty, the treaty between the Navajo Nation and the government, the federal government, in most cases, ADA doesn't apply on the Navajo Nation. But what we did was we have a Civil Rights for Individuals with Disabilities Act, which was put into place in 2018, and we were very instrumental from the Disability Law Center, and then also being on the Navajo Nation Council on Disabilities to have that passed by our council. It pretty much follows ADA in a lot of ways. The only time that ADA will really apply per se, like housing, like Joseph mentioned, our tribe receives HUD monies, and so if they receive federal dollars, a program, and then they have to follow ADA standards. Also, we have a transit system on the Navajo Nation, and they also receive federal dollars to run the transit system. So, and they also have to follow federal guidelines. But anything else that is funded by the Navajo Nation itself has to follow the Navajo Nation Civil Rights Act. So we're kind of in a unique situation here. And we have a lot of accessibility issues. And I think that's all over Indian country, because the fact that with the Navajo Nation, our buildings, a lot of them are inaccessible because they're old buildings. A lot of them were probably from the 50s, 60s. And so we just had a Navajo Nation Council pass $13 million and renovate that, get those buildings renovated, which still isn't going to be enough. But we also had the Navajo Nation Council pass the International Building Code. We didn't have that before, so that's going to help a lot in that any buildings that are construction on Navajo Nation have to follow the International Building Code, and also a lot of our office or modular buildings are brought onto the reservation, and they're going to have to comply also. So that's going to be a big help for us right now. Housing is a big issue, like Joseph said. We have about 40 to 50,000 Navajos with disabilities, and HUD requires 5% of those minimal to be disability accessible. So you can see, if you run the numbers, you're probably looking at 260 houses that need to be disability accessible versus 40 to 50,000 Navajos with disabilities, and so that's not going to meet the need. So we struggle with a lot of that here. And so there was accessibility issues. We just were able to work with over the 10, 12 years with the Navajo Nation Department of Transportation, because a lot of their buses were not equipped with wheelchair lifts. So at that time, it was very minimal. Up to this point, we have over 80% of the buses that are wheelchair equipped now. But we, New Mexico, Arizona, and Utah Department of Transportation donated bus shelters to the Navajo Nation, and they're still putting those out because of right-of-way issues that exist. And along with that, we're going to put down cement slabs so they can lower wheelchair lifts on. Voter accessibility is a big issue. We have 110 chapters, like community centers, on the Navajo Nation, and we have a hard time getting them to comply with accessibility so people with disabilities can get into those polling sites to vote. And so that's what we're really focusing on right at this point in time. I've been out the last 2 months doing polling site accessibility using the USDOJ 2016 accessibility survey. So those are just kind of the accessibility issues that I'm working on, and the Law Center and coordination with the different Navajo Nation divisions. Mine is more at that level than at a personal level.
Yeah, so sounds like lots of work to be done still, and it sounds like housing was a common theme for both of you that seems like probably needs more funding and support. So, what advice or resources would you offer to people who want to support the disability community as allies?
Well, for me, I would think that, and especially because of the recent chapters in my life, the overall picture of how our communities are served by usually a center or a program that's funded by the federal government. And for people with disabilities and elders wanting to remain active or living in their communities, we really don't have a resource to enable that other than what's already in place, which is Medicaid programs, especially in the tribal communities around the nation. I've been able to, meet with tribal leaders to come to understanding, that the Pueblo of Laguna is not unique in the fact that for so many tribes, lack of housing, lack of access to programs such as independent living assistant programs and other resources, people end up living in nursing homes. People with disabilities are using nursing homes as safety nets. Here at the Pueblo of Laguna, we have a nursing home, and quite a few of my fellow residents here are people who are from the community that have been living with a intellectual disability for many years. And because again of the lack of housing, if they didn't have this place, they really wouldn't have a safe place to be back in the community. So even though nursing homes have a bad name, unfortunately, because of the way tribal communities and tribal government funding is structured, nursing homes and the handful that are in tribal communities only address just a drop of the needs of tribal elders needing long-term services and support. So Hoskie and I have been working on that item, trying to increase awareness and the need for resources, dollars to fund what is called long-term services and support for especially how it affects our peers, tribal elders and people living with disabilities in tribal communities. You ask what resource we would offer. We don't have any really to offer. We're still trying to play. We're playing catch up in tribal communities, and that's the hard part, is trying to remind and educate tribal leaders to be aware of the needs and how federal government still has so much control over our lives, and the fact that our Indian Health Service and 638 clinics are not as funded as they should be. Again, that's a whole deeper issue. The resources that we have, I guess I have at hand. It's my knowledge of how tribal communities are. I've been advocating on a national level for disability services. I've been advocating on a national level through the National Congress of American Indians Disability Subcommittee, trying to bring those topics and raise awareness just by being a role model there with the National Congress of American Indians, just to, again, help the tribal leaders and their representatives be familiar, see how someone lives and functions and is able to advocate knowledgeably with them regarding the lack of services here. So that's what the resource I have at hand for myself, is that awareness and that knowledge of how tribal programs are funded and to this day. So, and how states, especially state of New Mexico, since I've lived here all my life, how that budget reflects back on tribal communities here in New Mexico. And the Navajo Nation, they are so powerful, and they are bringing the rest of the tribes along with them regarding the support of people with disabilities. But they can do that because of their numbers, and as Hoskie mentioned, with so many people living with disabilities in the Navajo Nation, that is a strong voting bloc. I also wanted to mention that I also advocate in the Pueblos in New Mexico regarding accessibility at the poll sites, because again, our tribal people need to voice themselves and vote.
Yeah, those are great points you bring up. I think it sounds like, people can just amplify your voices to help, generate that awareness of, some of the needs that you're having in your communities. Hoskie, how can people support you in your disability work?
Well, Joseph didn't mention that he's the chairperson for the National Congress of American Indian Subcommittee on Disabilities. So him and I, we're try to team up and get the word out through that method also, because there's a number of tribes that belong to NCAI. One of the things that we're lucky, again, on Navajo Nation is that, and I always advocate that with other tribes, is that the Navajo Nation, back in 1979, the Tribal Council passed the establishment of the Navajo Nation Advisory Council on Disabilities to be the spokesperson, official advocacy body. So, but in most tribes, they don't have that. And I tell them, somehow, some way you need to get the council to recognize an official advocacy body so that you can have the insight, not looking from the outside, but to influence policies related to disabilities. And a lot of tribes struggle with that. I think even establishing advocacy groups, sometimes they go so far and then they start to fizzle out. I know we tried that with Hopi tribe. We established an advocacy group and got to the point where we were getting to the council to recognize them officially as part of the Navajo Nation government, the Hopi government, and it just failed. What they need to do at a personal level, if they were recognized within their tribal government. I think a lot of times you have disability conferences and you don't really get a lot of response. You put out the word, you advertise, usually, and those kind of, like on the Navajo for sure, service providers are the ones that show up to people with disabilities that come to these conferences, and we struggle with that. Maybe transportation is an issue for a lot of people with disabilities, being on fixed income. And then there's also problems with their accessibility to computers, and because a lot of the word gets out on email, Facebook, things like that. And so I think it's communication deficiency that may exist on different tribes. So I just want to say to those with disabilities throughout the Indian country is to, and that's one of the things that I'm advocating at the national level also. We have a meeting, we have quarterly meetings, and everybody talks on a national level, and I'm talking more at the level of what we face. One of the things I just want to mention is that disabilities, when I got on, started to move towards addressing the issues and needs of on Indian country of people with disabilities. Back in 2000, President Clinton passed the executive order following consultation with and urging the executive branches of his administration to work with Indian tribes, but they didn't go very far. And here, Biden reinvigorated that. And so now the National Council on Disabilities is picking that up, moving forward on that and executive order. So one of the things that we'll be doing is we're planning right now in May of 2024. We're going to have National Council of Disabilities come to Navajo Land. We're going to do public forums, have people on Zoom, people with that just come in person to express what their needs and their issues are, and see if we can get enough information out of that to maybe develop policy at the national level. So this is their chance again to come and speak before somebody who has inroads to the president's office and to Congress. And so I really urge them to, we'll be putting out notices on that when that time comes. But that's one of the things that the National Council of Disabilities is looking forward to doing. So it gives us a great opportunity to have them hear our voices of our people at the national level. And so I just want to urge those that listen to this podcast to take note of that and look forward to that and hope they can also participate in that if they have a disability or if they're family members of a disability person. So that's some of the advocacy things that I see that we need to do and people need to get involved in.
Wonderful. Well, that's the end of the questions I had written down. Is there anything else the two of you would like to share with our listeners, or anything that we didn't ask that we should have?
Again, I would encourage youth and people with disabilities to really get involved on the local level and educate themselves about how various policies affect them in their lives, especially those that are living in tribal communities. As I said, my work and as Hoskie has related, his work is really on on the national level, I've been fortunate enough to be involved here in New Mexico with the local independent living center, which is based in Albuquerque, which is still an hour away. Not only am I speaking on behalf of my brothers and sisters here in the Pueblo, in the reservation, I'm also speaking on behalf of other people with disabilities throughout New Mexico, whether they're American Indian or Native American or not. And so as far as, having people locally understand how policy affects them and how they can be so influential over the development of policy that affects their daily lives, they really can make a career out of it, or make, create something for themselves to again be involved on that level. So many times we complain about how we don't have a voice. Well, I'm telling my peers that this is a way for you to affect change, to change systems. And again, as people with disability, living life with that disability, who else can speak, from the heart about it and how policy affects our lives? I would just encourage people to stay strong and get involved.
As far as anymore, I think one of the things that really hinders us as Native Americans with disabilities is the Indian health services. And like Joseph mentioned earlier, it's always been underfunded. And so people with disabilities, that's their primary place for receiving medical services and psychological services. And because it's underfunding at the local level, the different IHS regions have to prioritize where they're going to put their monies. And of course, people with disabilities aren't high on that priority list, apparently, because they take example where I'm at in Shiprock. If somebody goes to the local IHS facility here and they need specialty services, they're going to have to go to Albuquerque, which is about 3 or 4 hours away, or go down to Phoenix, which is about 5 or 6 hours, or up to Denver, which is 5 or 6 hours, and up to Salt Lake City. So those specialty services really don't exist as far as there's been talk about, well, why can't those specialty services be brought maybe on a consultant basis, on a contract basis, have people with those kind of expertise come to the community. So those are some of the issues that are talked about. The other thing is that if you have a disability, you're referred to Albuquerque as an example. They'll fly you down there if you need emergency services, but your family has to come for you. It's a one-way ticket, basically. And a lot of times, if they just go down there for state services, they have to pay for their own transportation, use their own car. Family members have to pay for gas, meals, lodging, and then get the service and then come back, hopefully that same day or the next day. So then we always have a turnover on doctors, medical people. We have high turnover in IHS. We have nurses, psychiatrists. And so a lot of times, and I've experienced that based on tearing a muscle in my right calf about a year ago or so. And so when I went up there, my primary physician that I used was not there anymore. So they shipped me from one doctor to another doctor within that same facility. So every time I went to a doctor to see about where I'm at and how they're going to provide medical services for my injury, I was sent to a different doctor. I had to tell the same story over and over and over about 4 or 5 different doctors. And people experience that. And it shouldn't be that way. But it's all due to funding. I don't know why we're constantly underfunded at the federal level, and we're under Health and Human Services of the United States Department. But that's a continuing problem that we've had for many years. But the United States, the federal government is the ones that are through treaty rights, they're supposed to provide that service for us. That's one of the biggest issues that I think a lot of people with disabilities clear across the Indian country face that. Of course, with COVID happening, it resulted in more people becoming in a disability condition. I know know here on the Navajo Nation, it has risen. We don't know the numbers right now, but people have come into having disabilities based on their getting COVID. So, and that's happened all across Indian country because we had a high percentage of people who were infected by that. When that happened, a lot of our facilities, IH facilities, weren't even ready. I think here on the Navajo Nation, it was reported that there was only 30 ventilators when that hit. And so they had to scramble and get more ventilators and things like that and more services. But we advocated that people with disabilities shouldn't be put on the waiting list, because that's kind of the normal thing that they would do, always put people with disabilities on the back burner. And we fought with that, and we went up to IHS with that and said, what are your standards as far as disabilities are concerned? And we deserve the same kind of services that everybody else has. So those are some of the things that we face here in Indian country.
Well, thank you both so much for your time today and for all of the good work you do on behalf of Native Americans with disabilities. If people want to connect with you after today's episode, what's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
Another area I just want to mention real quick is youth with disabilities and their transition from the different levels of education. We have a peer from the Navajo, a peer from the Southern Ute and Navajo Nation. His name is Noah Hotchkiss, and he's a recent graduate of the University of Illinois. But again, he has a spinal cord injury. He's been living with it for quite a few years. So I would really, just say the best way to get a hold of me is through my own personal email, which is jpwr1928@gmail.com, or my phone number 505-557-0276. But again, trying to improve in so many areas the quality of life with disabilities, Hoskie and myself. So thank you for this great opportunity today.
And mine is, you can reach me through my email, hbenally, Benally, @nativedisabilitylaw.org, or my phone number is 505-809-0668.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both again, and take care.
Thank you much.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode of Adventures in Accessibility. Tune in next time for another dive into the unknown.
Adventures in Accessibility is hosted by Emily Schumann, and Jessica Lucinia is our sound engineer. This podcast is a project of the Rocky Mountain ADA Center and is funded under a grant from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, grant number 90DPAD0014. This production is intended solely for entertainment and informal guidance and should not be considered legal advice. The opinions expressed by guests are not necessarily held or endorsed by the Rocky Mountain ADA Center.